in Tompkins County, and thousands may be counted in surrounding counties. That means that local races have technically not been decided yet. Here to share her thoughts on the election, we welcome Leslie Danks Burke, the Democratic candidate for New York's 58th State Senate District. Welcome, Leslie, to our show, and thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, to start off, as we reported earlier in the show, absentee and mail-in ballots received by Tompkins Board of Elections won't be counted until November 10th. And according to Commissioner Stephen DeWitt, that number amounts to more than 11,000 ballots in Tompkins. What do you think about that? And what do you think about ballots in other counties in the district?
Elections are decided by voters, and they're not decided by politicians or campaigns. And we have to make sure that every single voter has their opportunity to be heard. And we're in a pandemic. We are in an unprecedented situation in American politics where we just don't have the ability to get those votes counted as quickly as we might like, but that doesn't mean they don't count. We have to wait until we can open all of those ballots and understand what the voters have decided.
That being said, I imagine you're going through some, and you and your campaign might be going through some math on the numbers. Do you have any feeling of the prospects at this point for your candidacy?
I am very optimistic about the prospects for winning this race. I see victory on the horizon in 2 weeks when all of those ballots have been counted. You know, an analogy might be that in a normal year, we wouldn't know an election outcome right at 10 o'clock when we might want to know at 10 o'clock p.m. Instead, we would have to wait until 11 or 11:30. Well, in this case, we're going to have to wait a couple of weeks, and that's okay because democracy is about making sure that the voters have the opportunity to hold our elected officials accountable, and we're going to wait until every single voter's voice has been heard.
Well, thinking about those ballots and the challenges this year brought to getting all the votes counted, and we're still working on that, as you said. I'm wondering what you think about New York State voter policy and whether we might go the way of Oregon or other states where they instituted all mail-in voting.
I'm always in favor of making it easier for voters to participate in our democratic republic the way our founders imagined that we would. Anytime you can bring the voters closer to our elected officials, make sure that voters have the opportunity to cast their votes and, you know, hold our elected representatives accountable, that's all to the good. So if we can strip out some of the challenges that make it harder for folks to vote, I'm all in favor of that.
Thank you. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Leslie Danks Burke. She's the state Senate candidate from New York's 58th State Senate District, and you're tuned to WRFI Community Radio News. During your campaign, I'm sure you spoke to many folks across the district. What did you hear from them? What were the issues that you found that were most important to people in the 58th?
You know, all across this district, whether it was Tompkins County, where folks, tend to be registered Democratic more often than not, or whether it was in another county where the Republicans predominate, the issues were very much the same. And here's the issue. The issue is we are paying more in taxes than just about anywhere else in the country, but that money is not coming back to us. It's not coming back to our children's schools. It's not coming back to our bridges and roads. We don't see the investment here that we are due and that we're sure paying for through these very high property taxes. And the reason for that is our tax structure is very regressive. It hits people on the lowest end of the economic spectrum much harder than it hits folks at the tippity top. In fact, in New York State, there are billionaires in New York City who don't pay any taxes at all. And what we need to do as a society, we recognize left, right, no matter which political perspective you have, we recognize that the system right now is rigged in favor of the New York City billionaires who are being subsidized by the rest of us because they don't have to pay any taxes and the rest of us are having to pick up the tab.
That's such an interesting turn for a Democrat. I mean, normally it seems that Republicans are always hammering on the issue of taxation, and you bring a new perspective to that.
Well, I don't know if it's a Democratic or a Republican perspective, but I sure do have the perspective that the folks at the bottom should not have to prop up the folks at the top. And I also have the perspective that when you are participating in a democratic republic, everybody's supposed to pull their own weight. And that's not what we've got in New York State right now. And we need to get back to a structure where the people at the bottom are not having to support the folks who get off without hauling their fair share.
Yeah, and so given that, low taxes, or reducing taxes is often at least as far as that goes, a Republican talking point. You seem to carry it a bit further. What else do you think a Danks Burke win would offer folks in the district that an O'Mara win wouldn't?
Well, we know what an O'Mara win gives folks. We've had 16 years of neglect here, so we know that an O'Mara win is a continuation of the Southern Tier getting left behind on economic development dollars, the Southern Tier getting left behind on infrastructure investment. Our rural hospitals are struggling enormously right now with the pandemic because the supply chain infrastructure was not managed over the last couple of decades, and so we're in a real fix now where our rural hospitals simply don't have the beds or the support lines to be able to manage in a pandemic. So we know exactly what we'd get with a couple more years of O'Mara in this position. And what I offer as an alternative is someone who is very good at winning tough battles. I'm good at working with folks across political perspectives to find ways that we can pull together and raise a voice for our fair share. Mr. O'Mara does not have a seat at the table right now, and he says that. He acknowledges that he can't get anything done in Albany. And so my view is if you can't get anything done, step aside and let me at it, because I'm ready to get in there and fight hard for us.
And you were still looking at a Democratic majority in the Senate?
Looks to be that the Democrats have retained a majority in the state Senate. Really interesting piece there is that the typical Democratic bastions in New York State, we didn't see the usual wins there. We lost a little bit in the Hudson Valley area and on Long Island. And, it's these outlying races, like my race out here in central and western New York, and then there's one up near Rochester, and there's one out west toward Buffalo. That's where the Democrats are gaining seats. And I think that's all to the good. I think it's great when we can see that Democrats can win rural districts, and I think that in a couple weeks we're going to see that there's victory here in the Southern Tier, too.
We spoke yesterday to Mike Sigler of the Tompkins Republican Party, and he said one of the major issues for his party members was state bail reform. Is this an issue you think voters are concerned about, and what do you think Democrats offer here compared to Republicans?
Well, Democrats are about making sure that everybody gets treated fairly and that we don't have a system where rich people are able to buy their way out of participating. And what bail reform is really about is where is the boundary where we decide to hold people before we know whether they're guilty or not. There's always going to be a recognition that we're going to hold some people before trial. There's some cases that are so egregious that, we're just going to hold those people before we have a full trial for them. But the question in bail reform is, do we allow some people to buy their way out? Well, in New York State, up until bail reform passed, we did. We allowed folks who had wealth and who had means to buy their way out, and we kept the people who didn't have the wealth locked up. And that's un-American. We haven't ever had a promise in this country that you can buy your way into liberty through money. Of course, we've had that experience in this country, but the promise of this country has always been that we're better than that. And I think that we can continue to strive for that higher ideal that our founders envisioned, and that's one way of doing it.
Well, Leslie Danks Burke, Democratic candidate for New York State Senate in the 58th District. Do you have any final thoughts in the last minute or so about going forward in the election and, if you were to get the seat?
Well, I'm excited about these next 2 weeks. It's been a year-long race. We have 2 more weeks to go. We have fully 1/4 of votes that haven't been counted yet, and those can dramatically change the outcome of this election. So I'm looking forward to hearing from every single voter.
Well, once again, Leslie Danks Burke, thank you so much for joining us here on WRFI Community Radio News.
Thank you for having me.
All right.